I'm Scarlett Martin, 28 years old, and 6 months ago my entire world collapsed when my grandmother died. The grief was suffocating, like drowning in slow motion while everyone around me continued breathing normally. But what my parents did next was even worse. If you've ever trusted someone completely only to have them destroy that trust when you needed them most, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of soul-deep betrayal. It wasn't always like this. I met my boyfriend Jake 4 years ago at a bookstore in downtown Portland, of all places. I was reaching for a copy of The 7 Husbands of Lisa Hernandez on the top shelf, standing on my tiptoes in my worn Converse sneakers when this tall guy with gentle brown eyes and paint-stained fingers appeared beside me. "Need some help?" he asked, his voice carrying just a hint of a southern accent that made my stomach flutter. He grabbed the book easily and handed it to me with a crooked smile that would become my favorite thing in the world. "Good choice," he said, nodding at the cover, though I'm more of a sci-fi guy myself. We ended up talking for 2 hours in the cafe section, sharing a blueberry muffin and debating whether romance novels were underrated literature. He smelled like coffee and something woodsy, and when he laughed, his whole face lit up. Jake was working as a freelance graphic designer then, barely making ends meet but passionate about his art. I was finishing my marketing degree and working part-time at a local yoga studio. We were both broke but happy, living on cheap Thai takeout and grand dreams. Those first few years together felt like building something beautiful with our bare hands. Jake moved into my tiny studio apartment 3 months after we met, and somehow we made it work. He designed logos at the fold-out table while I studied on the bed, my textbooks spread around me like fallen leaves. We'd take breaks to dance to whatever playlist was shuffling through my ancient speakers, usually ending up collapsed in giggles on the hardwood floor. Our Friday nights were spent at the farmer's market, buying ingredients for elaborate dinners we'd cook together. Jake introduced me to his love of hiking, and I showed him the joy of Sunday morning yoga. We had this inside joke about naming all the plants in our apartment. There was Ferdinand the fern, Beatrice the begonia, and our pride and joy, Shakespeare the snake plant. When I graduated, Jake surprised me with a tiny succulent he'd named Diploma. "For your collection," he said, kissing my forehead. "And because you're officially smarter than me now." I got a job at a mid-size marketing firm, and Jake's design business started taking off. We moved to a 1-bedroom apartment with actual counter space and windows that let in real sunlight. Our biggest fights were about whose turn it was to do dishes and whether we should get a cat. Life felt stable, predictable, safe. The golden period lasted about 2 years. I was thriving at work, earning enough to actually save money for the first time in my adult life. Jake had landed a contract with a local brewery to design all their packaging, which meant steady income and creative fulfillment. Our typical Saturday started with coffee from the French press Jake had saved up to buy me for my birthday, followed by farmers market runs where we'd sample honey and buy flowers we couldn't afford. We'd spend afternoons in Powell's books, each picking out novels for the other to read. Jake would sketch while I read, occasionally showing me drawings of my hands or the way the light hit my hair. We talked about everything: marriage, kids, whether we'd stay in Portland forever or eventually move somewhere with better weather. I felt loved in a way I'd never experienced before, cherished for exactly who I was rather than who someone wanted me to become. Jake saw my anxiety spirals coming before I did and knew exactly how to talk me through them. He celebrated my work promotions like they were his own victories and never once made me feel guilty for earning more money than him. For the first time in my life, I understood what unconditional love looked like. But perfect moments never last forever, and I should have noticed the small signs that something in my family was shifting. During our weekly video calls, my mom started mentioning my sister Lily's struggles more frequently, how hard it was being a single mom, how expensive everything was, how she just needed a break. Dad would chime in with comments about family responsibility and helping those who need it most. These conversations always seemed to happen when I mentioned good news about work or something fun Jake and I had planned. There was also the way they'd grown increasingly critical of my choices. My apartment was too expensive. I was spending too much on frivolous things like yoga classes and dinners out. Maybe I should be thinking more about my family's needs. When I'd push back gently, reminding them that I was an adult with my own life, they'd get this wounded look and start talking about how they'd raised me to be more generous and family-oriented. I'd always end up apologizing, promising to be more thoughtful, while something uncomfortable twisted in my stomach. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday morning in March. I woke up to Jake making coffee, the smell of dark roast mixing with the lavender body wash from my shower. The morning light was streaming through our bedroom window, highlighting the dust motes floating in the air like tiny dancers. I had a client presentation that afternoon that I'd been preparing for weeks, and Jake was meeting with a potential new client about rebranding their restaurant. We kissed goodbye at the front door, him tasting like coffee and mint toothpaste. And I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this life, this person, this ordinary Tuesday morning that felt like pure contentment. By evening, everything I thought I knew about my family would be shattered beyond repair. The call came just after lunch. I was reviewing presentation slides when my phone buzzed with my mom's contact photo, the one of her and Dad from their last anniversary dinner, both of them smiling in the soft restaurant lighting. "Scarlett, honey, I have some news," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when she was about to tell me something she knew I wouldn't like. The words came out in a rush. Grandma Helen had passed away suddenly that morning. A stroke in her sleep, peaceful but unexpected. The funeral would be in 4 days. Could I come home immediately? I felt the world tilt sideways, my chest constricting like someone was squeezing all the air from my lungs. Grandma Helen had been my anchor, the one person in my family who loved me without conditions or expectations. She'd taught me to bake bread, listened to my teenage heartbreaks, and sent me care packages throughout college, filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes telling me how proud she was. The thought of never hearing her laugh again, never getting another one of her rambling voicemails about her garden or the neighbor's cat felt impossible to accept. I grew up in a small town in Idaho where everyone knew everyone else's business, and appearances mattered more than almost anything else. My parents, Robert and Linda Martin, were pillars of the community. Dad worked at the bank, Mom taught 3rd grade, and they never missed church on Sunday. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Inside our ranch-style house with the meticulously maintained yard, things were more complicated. My sister Lily was 4 years older than me and had always been the golden child. She was homecoming queen, head cheerleader, and could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was the studious one, the reliable one, the one who got good grades and never caused trouble. But somehow, being good was never enough to earn the same level of attention and adoration that Lily received effortlessly. When Lily got pregnant at 19 and dropped out of college, it was treated as a wonderful blessing. When I graduated summa cum laude and got a job offer in Portland, my parents spent the celebration dinner talking about how I was abandoning my family for selfish pursuits. The pattern became clear over the years. Lily's mistakes were reframed as misfortunes that required family support. My achievements were either downplayed or presented as evidence that I should be doing more to help others. When Lily's boyfriend left her with a toddler and no job skills, I was expected to send money for diapers and formula. When she couldn't make rent, I was guilted into covering it because family takes care of family. Anytime I tried to set boundaries or express frustration, I was painted as the selfish sister who'd gotten too big for her britches. My parents had perfected the art of emotional manipulation, using guilt and family loyalty as weapons to keep me in line. They'd remind me of everything they'd sacrificed for my education, how disappointed Grandma Helen would be if she knew I wasn't helping my sister, how important it was to put family before personal desires. In contrast, Jake's family had shown me what healthy relationships could look like. His parents, Sarah and Mike, lived in a small California town and treated me like a daughter from our first meeting. They asked about my job because they were genuinely interested, not because they wanted to calculate what I could afford to give others. When Jake and I visited for holidays, they created space for both of us, included me in family traditions, and never once made me feel like an outsider. Jake's sister Emily was a teacher who struggled financially, but when she needed help, the family discussed it openly, and everyone contributed what they could without guilt or manipulation. They disagreed sometimes, even argued occasionally, but there was an underlying respect and love that made conflict feel safe rather than devastating. Being with them showed me that family could be a source of strength rather than constant stress, that love didn't have to come with strings attached. I had friends who understood the complexity of difficult family relationships. My coworker Marcus had gone no contact with his father after years of emotional abuse, and he'd been a source of wisdom when I struggled with guilt over my own family dynamics. My college roommate Sarah had parents who played favorites with her siblings, and she'd learned to protect herself by limiting how much she shared about her successes. Jake's best friend David had grown up with narcissistic parents and often reminded me that family dysfunction wasn't my responsibility to fix. These relationships had taught me that my normal meter was broken, that the constant walking on eggshells around my family wasn't actually normal or necessary. But knowing something intellectually and being ready to act on it were two very different things. The morning of Grandma Helen's death started with my usual routine in our Portland apartment. I made overnight oats with fresh berries. Jake sketched while drinking his coffee, and we shared the newspaper comics section like we did every morning. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and coffee, and jazz was playing softly from our Bluetooth speaker. Jake had a client meeting scheduled for that afternoon, and I was presenting a new campaign strategy to a potential client. We were both excited about our respective projects, discussing them over breakfast like we always did. "I think they're gonna love your ideas," Jake said, reaching across our small table to squeeze my hand. His fingers were warm and slightly rough from his weekend woodworking hobby. "You've put so much thought into understanding their brand." I felt that familiar warmth of being truly seen and supported. The morning light was streaming through our kitchen window. illuminating the small succulent garden we'd started on the windowsill. Everything felt normal, safe, predictable. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I was sitting in my car in the office parking lot, sobbing so hard I couldn't catch my breath. The call from my mother had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had destroyed everything I thought I knew about grief and family support. After she told me about Grandma Helen's death, her next words were burned into my memory. "Now, Scarlett, I know this is hard, but we need to talk about arrangements. The funeral is going to be expensive, and with everything Lily's dealing with right now, we were hoping you could help cover some costs. You know how tight money is for all of us." The casual way she transitioned from announcing my grandmother's death to asking for money left me speechless. I managed to choke out that of course I'd help with funeral expenses. Grandma Helen deserved a beautiful service, but something in my mother's tone made my stomach clench with dread. "There's something else," Mom continued, her voice taking on that false brightness she used when she was about to ask for something she knew was unreasonable. "Lily's been so stressed lately with work and little Emma, and the doctor said she needs to take some time for her mental health. We found this wonderful wellness retreat in Arizona that could really help her, but it's quite expensive. Since you're doing so well financially, and since Grandma Helen always said you were the responsible one, we were hoping you might consider covering the costs. It would mean so much to the family." The retreat cost $8,000, $8,000 of my carefully saved money, the emergency fund Jake and I had built together, the down payment we'd been saving for our first house. Money I'd earned through years of 60-hour work weeks and careful budgeting, money that represented our dreams and our future together. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, watching office workers walk past my car window while I tried to process what had just happened. My grandmother was dead, and instead of offering comfort or support, my mother had immediately started calculating how much money they could extract from my grief. The timing wasn't coincidental. They knew I'd be vulnerable, more likely to say yes to requests I'd normally refuse. I called Jake with shaking hands, barely able to explain what had happened through my tears. "I'm coming to get you," he said immediately. "Don't drive anywhere. I'll be there in 15 minutes. His voice was steady and calm, exactly what I needed when my world was falling apart. When he found me in the parking lot, he didn't ask questions or offer platitudes. He just held me while I cried, his hand stroking my hair while I soaked his t-shirt with tears that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. 3 days later, I was standing in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the faded boy band posters and academic achievement certificates that my parents had never bothered to take down. The room smelled like the lavender air freshener my mom sprayed everywhere, mixing with the mustiness of old carpet and memories. Jake had driven with me to Idaho, taking time off work to support me through the funeral. He was downstairs in the kitchen, probably being interrogated by my mother about his job prospects and our relationship timeline. I could hear the murmur of voices through the thin walls, punctuated by my sister Lily's sharp laugh. She'd arrived that morning with 4-year-old Emma in tow, looking perfectly put together despite her claims of being overwhelmed and stressed. Her hair was freshly highlighted, her nails were professionally done, and she was carrying a designer purse I knew cost more than my monthly rent. The family gathering before the funeral was everything I dreaded. Relatives I hadn't seen in years offered hollow condolences before immediately pivoting to questions about my job, my income, and whether Jake and I were planning to get married anytime soon. Aunt Margaret cornered me by the coffee pot to ask if I'd considered that it might be selfish to live so far from family when they clearly needed my support. Uncle Bill made several comments about how some people forget where they come from when they start making good money. Lily held court in the living room, regaling everyone with stories about how difficult single motherhood was, how impossible it was to make ends meet, how lucky some people were to have easy lives without real responsibilities. Every comment felt like a carefully aimed arrow, designed to highlight my relative privilege and guilt me into compliance. The funeral itself was beautiful in the way that small-town ceremonies often are. The Methodist Church was packed with people who genuinely loved Grandma Helen, and the stories shared during the service painted a picture of a woman who'd touched countless lives with her kindness and generosity. I spoke about the summers I'd spent with her, learning to can peaches, and listening to her stories about growing up during the Depression. But even in my grief, I couldn't shake the awareness that my family was watching me, calculating, waiting for the right moment to press their advantage. During the graveside service, as dirt was thrown onto my grandmother's casket, my mother squeezed my hand and whispered, "She would have wanted you to take care of Lily." The manipulation was so blatant, so perfectly timed, that I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. After the burial, the family gathered at my parents' house for the traditional post-funeral meal. The dining room table was covered with casseroles and desserts brought by church friends, the smell of green bean casserole and funeral potatoes filling the air. Jake stayed close to my side, offering quiet support and deflecting invasive questions from relatives. I watched him charm my elderly great-aunt with stories about his graphic design work, help my cousin's kids with their tablets, and genuinely connect with people despite the obvious tension in the room. He was everything my family wasn't: authentic, supportive, interested in others, without ulterior motives. Watching him navigate my toxic family dynamics with such grace made me love him even more, and highlighted just how dysfunctional my normal had always been. The conversation I'd been dreading finally happened after most of the relatives had gone home. My parents, Lily, Jake, and I were sitting in the living room, the afternoon light filtering through my mother's lace curtains and casting intricate shadows on the floral carpet. Emma was napping on the couch, exhausted from the long day. The adults were drinking coffee from my grandmother's good china, the cups tinkling softly against the saucers in the suddenly quiet room. "Scarlett," my father began, using his banker voice that meant business was about to be discussed. "Your mother and I have been thinking about what Grandma Helen would have wanted." He explained that they'd found the perfect way to honor her memory by helping Lily get the mental health treatment she desperately needed. The Arizona Retreat Center specialized in stress management for single mothers, offering therapy, yoga, meditation, and spa treatments in a beautiful desert setting. "It's exactly what Grandma Helen would have wanted," my mother added, her eyes filling with practiced tears. "She always worried about Lily, always said someone needed to help her learn to take care of herself. This retreat could change her whole life, give her the tools she needs to be a better mother and find some peace." The price tag was steep, they acknowledged, but it was an investment in the family's future. Lily sat silent during this presentation, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while looking appropriately grateful and overwhelmed. She was wearing a black dress that she'd bought specifically for the funeral, something expensive and fashionable that didn't match her claims of financial desperation. Her highlights were perfect, her makeup professionally applied, and her nails were shaped and polished in a way that spoke of regular salon visits. "I know it's a lot to ask," my father continued, "but you're the only one in the family who's in a position to help. Your success has been such a blessing, and we know Grandma Helen would be so proud to see you using that success to help your sister." The manipulation was expertly crafted. They'd wrapped their request in grief, family loyalty, and religious obligation, making it nearly impossible to refuse without appearing selfish or heartless. Jake's hand found mine on the couch cushion, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of solidarity. I could feel the tension radiating from his body, his natural protectiveness warring with his desire not to overstep in my family dynamics. I asked for time to think about it, which seemed reasonable given the circumstances. But over the next 2 days, the pressure campaign intensified. My mother called every few hours with updates on Lily's deteriorating mental state, how the opportunity at the retreat center might not be available for much longer, how important it was to act quickly. Lily herself cornered me in the kitchen to tearfully explain how desperate she was, how she'd been having panic attacks and couldn't sleep, how she was worried she was becoming a bad mother to Emma. "I know you probably think I'm just being dramatic," she said, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine emotion, "but I'm really struggling, Scarlett. I need help, and you're the only person who can provide it." The guilt was overwhelming, exactly as it was designed to be. Even relatives I barely knew started weighing in with their opinions. Aunt Margaret sent a long text message about family obligations and Christian duty. Cousin Rebecca called to share her own struggles with postpartum depression, subtly suggesting that I couldn't possibly understand what Lily was going through unless I'd experienced motherhood myself. Uncle Bill stopped by to reminisce about how generous Grandma Helen had always been, how she'd never hesitated to help family members in need, how she'd be disappointed to see the family becoming selfish and disconnected. The message was clear. Saying no would make me the villain, the ungrateful daughter who'd forgotten her roots and abandoned her family in their time of need. While Sammy Jake watched this manipulation campaign with growing anger and disbelief. "They're using your grief against you," he said quietly one evening as we walked around my parents' neighborhood, trying to escape the suffocating atmosphere in the house. "This whole thing is orchestrated. They planned this." His observation stung because it was so obviously true. The timing, the presentation, the coordinated pressure from multiple family members, none of it was accidental. They'd waited until I was most vulnerable, most likely to comply, and then deployed every emotional weapon in their arsenal. The realization that my family saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved was devastating in a way that cut deeper than grief. On our last night in Idaho, I finally gave them an answer. We were sitting in the same living room where the initial request had been made, the familiar smell of my mother's potpourri and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, creating an atmosphere of forced domesticity. "I'll pay for the retreat," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The relief on their faces was immediate and visible, transforming their expressions from worried concern to triumphant satisfaction. Lily burst into tears and threw her arms around me, thanking me over and over while my parents beamed with approval. "Grandma Helen would be so proud," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion that might have been genuine. "You're doing such a good thing, sweetheart. This is what family is all about." The next morning, as Jake and I loaded our suitcases into his Honda Civic for the drive back to Portland, I felt hollowed out and empty. The $8,000 was gone from our joint savings account, transferred to the retreat center with a few clicks on my banking app. Our house down payment fund was depleted, our wedding savings account drained, our carefully planned future suddenly uncertain. Jake hadn't said a word of complaint or criticism, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes, the way he gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly as we pulled out of my parents' driveway. We drove in silence for the first hour, the Idaho landscape rolling past our windows like a movie I wasn't really watching. "I'm sorry," I finally said somewhere outside of Boise, my voice cracking with emotion I'd been holding back for days. "I know this wasn't what we planned. I know it's not fair to you." Jake pulled over at the next rest stop, a windswept parking area with picnic tables and a view of distant mountains. He turned off the engine and turned to face me, his brown eyes soft with understanding. "Scarlett, I don't care about the money," he said, reaching for my hands. "I care about you. I care about how they treat you, how they make you feel, how they manipulate your love for them into something that hurts you." His words broke something open in my chest, and I cried harder than I had since the day Grandma Helen died. 2 weeks later, while we were still adjusting to our new financial reality, and I was still processing the grief and guilt, my phone rang with my mother's contact photo, lighting up the screen. I was at work, reviewing quarterly reports in my office, overlooking downtown Portland, trying to focus on anything other than the empty feeling that had settled in my chest since the funeral. "Hi, sweetheart." My mother's voice was bright and cheerful, the tone she used when she was particularly pleased about something. "I hope you're doing well. I have some exciting news to share." My stomach immediately clenched with a familiar dread, the Pavlovian response I developed to that particular vocal inflection. The news was indeed exciting. For them. My parents were approaching their 30th wedding anniversary, a milestone they'd apparently decided to celebrate with a romantic getaway to Hawaii. They'd found the perfect resort, booked the flights, and planned a week-long celebration of their enduring love. There was just one small problem. They'd overspent on Lily's retreat and didn't have quite enough left in their budget to cover all the anniversary expenses. "Nothing major," my mother assured me, "just the cost of the hotel and maybe a nice dinner or two." Perhaps I could help them out, as a way of honoring their marriage and showing appreciation for everything they'd done for me over the years. I sat in my office chair staring out at the Portland skyline while my mother rattled off the details of their planned vacation. The hotel was a luxury resort with ocean views and spa services. The flights were first class. The restaurants they wanted to try were the kind that required reservations months in advance. This wasn't a modest celebration or a simple getaway. It was an extravagant vacation that would cost at least $5,000. Money they were asking me to provide less than 3 weeks after I'd given them $8,000 for Lily's retreat. The audacity was breathtaking, but what stunned me even more was the casual way they presented it, as if asking for money had become so normal that they didn't even need to acknowledge what they were doing. "I need some time to think about it," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange even to my own ears. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear my mother's smile faltering. "Well, of course, dear," she said, but her tone had shifted to something cooler, more calculated. "Just don't take too long. We need to finalize the hotel reservations by Friday, and you know how these nice places fill up quickly." The implicit threat was clear: delay too long, and they'd make me responsible for ruining their anniversary celebration. After I hung up, I sat in my office for 20 minutes, watching people walk past on the street below and trying to process what had just happened. That evening, Jake and I sat on our small balcony overlooking the city, sharing a bottle of wine and trying to make sense of my family's latest request. The Portland evening was cool and crisp, the smell of rain in the air mixing with the distant aroma of food trucks and coffee shops. Jake had made pasta with vegetables from our farmer's market haul, and we'd eaten dinner while discussing his new project designing menus for a local restaurant group. For a few hours, I'd managed to forget about family drama and just enjoy our simple, peaceful life together. But my mother's phone call had shattered that peace, bringing all the stress and guilt rushing back with renewed intensity. "They can't be serious," Jake said, refilling our wine glasses with the cheap Merlot we'd splurged on at the grocery store. "You just gave them $8,000 3 weeks ago? $8,000 of our money, our future." His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the frustration underneath. He'd been patient and supportive through the funeral and Lily's retreat, never once making me feel guilty for choosing my family over our financial goals. But this new request was testing even his considerable reserves of understanding. "It's like they see you as an ATM," he continued, running his hand through his hair in the gesture he made when he was trying not to say something he'd regret. "They don't see you as a person with your own needs and dreams." I wanted to defend them, to explain that families help each other, that their marriage milestone was important and worth celebrating. But the words stuck in my throat because deep down, I knew Jake was right. My parents had never once asked how the financial sacrifice had affected me and Jake. They'd never acknowledged that $8,000 represented months of careful saving, plans postponed, dreams deferred. They'd never even thanked me properly, just moved immediately from gratitude to the next request as if my generosity was an inexhaustible resource they could tap whenever convenient. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't ignore it. They only contacted me when they needed something, and they only showed interest in my life when it related to my ability to solve their problems. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and internal conflict. My mother called twice more, each conversation a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She reminded me of the sacrifices they'd made for my education, the opportunities they'd provided, the love and support they'd given me throughout my childhood. She painted a picture of their marriage as a beacon of stability in an uncertain world, something worth celebrating and protecting. She mentioned casually that Lily was already seeing improvements from her time at the retreat, proof that family investment paid dividends in happiness and healing. Every conversation left me feeling guilty, selfish, and confused about what I actually owed to the people who'd raised me. Jake watched me spiral with growing concern. He found me crying in the shower one morning, overwhelmed by the impossible choice between disappointing my family and destroying our financial future. He held me while I sobbed, my tears mixing with the hot water, and didn't offer solutions or advice. He just listened as I worked through my feelings out loud, untangling the complex web of obligation, love, resentment, and guilt that my family had woven around my heart. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "I'll support you, but I need you to know that your happiness matters too. Your dreams matter. Our future together matters." On Thursday evening, I called my parents with my decision. I was sitting in our bedroom, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness, while Jake worked on his laptop in the living room. The familiar smell of his coffee and the soft sound of keyboard clicks created a backdrop of normalcy that made the conversation feel even more surreal. "I can't afford to pay for your anniversary trip," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "The retreat for Lily took everything we had saved, and we need to rebuild our emergency fund." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "I see," she said, each word carefully enunciated. "I suppose we misunderstood how much our marriage meant to you. We thought after everything we've done, after raising you and supporting your education and always being there for you, that you might want to help us celebrate this milestone. But apparently, we were wrong about the kind of daughter we raised." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to maximize guilt and emotional damage. She continued with a litany of disappointments: how selfish I'd become since moving to Portland, how Jake was clearly a bad influence, how Grandma Helen would be heartbroken to see me abandon family values for material concerns. The call ended with my mother hanging up on me, something that had never happened in my 28 years of life. I sat in the gathering darkness of our bedroom, holding my silent phone and feeling like I'd just survived a natural disaster. Jake appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, his face soft with concern. "How did it go?" he asked gently, though my expression probably told him everything he needed to know. I couldn't speak for several minutes, just let him hold me while I processed what had just happened. My mother's words echoed in my mind, each accusation finding its target in the vulnerable places where my self-doubt lived. The following week, the silent treatment began in earnest. My daily texts to my mother went unanswered. My father, who usually sent me funny memes and articles about marketing trends, stopped all communication. Lily, who'd been texting regularly with updates from her retreat, suddenly went radio silent. Even my extended family seemed to have gotten the memo. No more random Facebook comments from cousins. No more forwards of family photos from aunts. The message was clear. I'd crossed a line and was being punished for my selfishness. The isolation was deliberate and devastating, designed to make me reconsider my decision and come crawling back with my checkbook. But something unexpected happened during that week of silence. Instead of feeling guilty and desperate to repair the relationship, I started to feel lighter. The constant anxiety about money requests disappeared. The walking on eggshells feeling that had characterized every family interaction began to fade. Jake and I had dinner without me checking my phone every 5 minutes for guilt-inducing text messages. We made plans for the weekend without factoring in family drama or emotional emergencies. I started to remember what it felt like to live without the constant undercurrent of manipulation and obligation that had become my normal. Jake noticed the change too. "You seem different," he said one evening as we walked through our neighborhood, enjoying the spring weather and the blooming cherry trees that lined our street. "More relaxed, more yourself." He was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next family crisis or calculating how much money I could afford to give away. I was just living my life, focusing on my relationship and my career and my own happiness. It was a revelation that both thrilled and terrified me. If this was what life felt like without constant family drama, what did that say about the relationships I'd been prioritizing? 2 weeks into the silent treatment, my phone rang with Lily's contact photo. I almost didn't answer. The peace had been so wonderful that I wasn't ready to let it go. But curiosity won out, and I picked up on the 4th ring. "Scarlett?" Lily's voice was different somehow, less polished than usual. Can we talk? I mean, really talk? She was calling from Arizona, taking a break from her retreat schedule to reach out. What she said next knocked the breath out of my lungs. I need to tell you something about the money, about what really happened with the anniversary trip. It turned out that my parents had already booked their Hawaii vacation before Grandma Helen died. They'd paid for it months earlier, using money they'd saved specifically for their anniversary. The resort, the flights, the expensive dinners, all of it was already arranged and paid for. They hadn't overspent on Lily's retreat. They'd simply seen an opportunity to get me to pay for something they'd already budgeted for themselves. The timing of their request, coming so soon after the $8,000 retreat payment, had been calculated to maximize my guilt and minimize my ability to think clearly about their finances. They've been planning this for months, Lily continued, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't identify. The whole thing was their idea, the retreat, the timing, even getting me to play up how desperate I was. They coached me on what to say to make you feel sorry for me. The retreat was real, and she was genuinely benefiting from the therapy and stress management techniques. But the crisis that had prompted it, the financial desperation, the mental health emergency, all of it had been manufactured to create urgency and sympathy. My parents had orchestrated the entire scenario using both my grief over Grandma Helen and my love for my sister to manipulate me into funding their vacation. I sat down hard on our living room couch, the room spinning slightly as I processed what Lily was telling me. Every conversation, every tearful plea, every guilt-inducing comment about family obligation had been part of an elaborate con game designed to separate me from my money. They'd used my grandmother's death, my sister's mental health, and my own generous nature as weapons against me. The level of calculation and manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "'Cause the therapist here has been helping me understand some things about our family," Lily said slowly. "About the patterns, the roles we all play, the way Mom and Dad pit us against each other. And because what they did to you was wrong, Scarlett. What I helped them do was wrong." She paused, and I could hear voices and laughter in the background of wherever she was calling from. "I've been thinking about all the times they've used me to make you feel guilty, all the ways they've made you responsible for my problems. It's not fair to either of us. They've been using both of us, just in different ways." The conversation lasted for over an hour, with Lily sharing insights from her therapy sessions and me slowly understanding the full scope of my family's manipulation. She told me about other times when they'd exaggerated her problems to guilt me into sending money, situations where they'd coached her to call me crying about financial emergencies that weren't quite as dire as they'd seemed. She explained how they'd always presented her struggles and my successes as opposite sides of the same coin, making it seem like my happiness came at the cost of her suffering. The pattern had been so consistent, so carefully maintained, that neither of us had questioned it until now. When we finally hung up, I felt like I was seeing my family clearly for the first time in my adult life. The people who were supposed to love and support me had been systematically using my love for them to exploit me financially and emotionally. They'd turned my sister into a weapon against me, and me into a bank account for them. The realization was devastating, but it was also liberating. For the first time, I understood that the guilt I'd been carrying wasn't based on real moral obligations, but on manufactured crises designed to keep me compliant and generous. Jake found me sitting on the couch an hour later, staring at my phone and trying to process everything Lily had told me. "Are you okay?" he asked, settling beside me and taking my hand in his warm, steady grip. When I explained what I'd learned, his face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, protectiveness, and finally a kind of sad understanding. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I knew they were manipulative. But this is so much worse than I thought." He held me while I cried angry tears, mourning not just my grandmother, but the family I'd thought I had, the parents I'd believed loved me unconditionally. That night, we stayed up until 3 in the morning, talking through everything. Jake helped me see patterns I'd been blind to, ways my family had been training me since childhood to prioritize their needs over my own. He reminded me of stories I'd told him about my teenage years, times when I'd given up things I wanted to help Lily or keep peace in the family. He pointed out how my parents had never once asked about my own struggles or offered support during difficult times in my life. "When you were stressed about your thesis in college, did they offer to help?" he asked gently. "When you were job hunting after graduation and worried about money, did they offer any assistance?" The answer was no, of course. They'd expected me to figure it out on my own while simultaneously expecting me to solve everyone else's problems. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day walking around Portland, trying to clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do next. I walked through the Pearl District, past the bookstore where Jake and I had met, through the parks where we'd had picnics and made plans for our future. The city felt different somehow, more solid and real than the family relationships that had been built on manipulation and lies. I realized that this These people, this life I'd built with Jake, this was my real home. My family had never felt like home in the way Portland did, had never provided the safety and acceptance I'd found here. By evening, I'd made my decision. I was going to confront my parents directly, lay out everything I'd learned, and give them a chance to acknowledge their behavior and commit to changing it. If they were willing to have an honest conversation about our relationship and establish healthier boundaries, maybe we could salvage something. If not, I was prepared to walk away entirely. The thought of cutting contact with my family was terrifying, but the thought of continuing to live under their manipulation was even worse. I deserved better, Jake deserved better, and our future together deserved better than being constantly undermined by people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I called my parents that evening and asked if we could have a family meeting via video call. My mother's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away about her expectations or concerns. "Of course, dear," she said, "it will be nice to see your face again. We've missed you." The false warmth in her voice, knowing what I now knew about their deception, made my skin crawl. We scheduled the call for the following Saturday afternoon, which would give me time to prepare what I wanted to say and steel myself for what would likely be a difficult conversation. Jake spent Friday evening helping me organize my thoughts and practice what I wanted to say. We made lists of specific incidents and patterns, times when their requests had been unreasonable or their manipulation had been particularly obvious. He helped me understand that I didn't need to prove my case to them. I just needed to be clear about what I'd learned and what I expected going forward. "You don't owe them a relationship," he reminded me. "Family is supposed to be a source of support and love, not constant stress and financial drain. If they can't provide that, you have every right to protect yourself." Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched my mood perfectly. Jake had offered to be present for the call, but I decided this was something I needed to handle alone. He kissed my forehead before retreating to our bedroom, close enough to provide support if needed, but far enough away to give me space. I set up my laptop at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared so many peaceful meals and conversations. The familiar surroundings gave me strength, reminding me of the life I'd built independent of my family's drama and expectations. The video call connected at exactly 2 o'clock, revealing my parents sitting in their living room with the familiar floral couch and family photos in the background. They looked exactly as I remembered, my father in his weekend polo shirt, my mother with her hair perfectly styled despite being at home. They smiled and waved when they saw me, their expressions warm and loving in the way that had always made me doubt my own perceptions of their manipulation. "There's our successful daughter," my father said with apparent pride. "You look wonderful, sweetheart. Portland must be treating you well." I didn't waste time with small talk. "I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Lily called me last week from her retreat. She told me some things about the anniversary trip, about how you'd already paid for it before asking me for money." The change in their expressions was immediate and telling. My mother's smile faltered, and my father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They exchanged a quick glance that spoke volumes about their awareness of what Lily had revealed. "I'm not sure what Lily told you," my mother said carefully, "but you know how confused she's been lately. The stress has really affected her thinking, and sometimes she misremembers things or gets details mixed up." The gaslighting was immediate and predictable, exactly the response I'd expected but had hoped I wouldn't receive. They were going to deny everything, make me question my own understanding, and probably blame Lily's mental health for any confusion. The pattern was so familiar that I almost felt relieved to see it. At least I knew exactly what I was dealing with. "She wasn't confused," I said firmly. "She was very clear about what happened. You coached her on what to say to make me feel guilty. You used my grief over Grandma Helen to manipulate me into paying for a vacation you'd already budgeted for." I outlined everything Lily had told me, watching their faces grow increasingly defensive and angry. My father interrupted several times to deny specific details, while my mother tried to redirect the conversation to how hurt they were by my accusations. The familiar dance of deflection and denial was exhausting, but I pressed on. "What, this isn't just about the money," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. "It's about the pattern. Every time you contact me, it's because you need something. Every conversation becomes about what I can do for other people, never about my own life or needs or happiness. You've been using my love for this family as a weapon against me, and I'm done enabling it." The words felt powerful coming out of my mouth, like I was finally speaking a truth I'd been carrying for years without acknowledging it. My mother's response was swift and vicious. "I can't believe you're attacking us like this," she said, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine hurt. "After everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we've made, this is how you repay us, by believing lies and turning against your own family?" She launched into a detailed recitation of their parental sacrifices, the money they'd spent on my education, the time they'd devoted to my activities, the opportunities they'd provided. Each example was presented as evidence of my ingratitude and obligation to them now. We never asked for anything unreasonable, my father added, his banker voice sharp with disapproval. We asked for help with family emergencies and important milestones. That's what families do. They support each other. If you can't understand that basic responsibility, then maybe we didn't raise you as well as we thought we did. The guilt-inducing language was expertly deployed, designed to make me feel selfish and ungrateful for questioning their behavior. In the past, these tactics would have worked. I would have apologized, backed down, and probably offered to send more money to prove my love and commitment to the family. But something had shifted during my weeks of clarity and distance. Their words bounced off me like rain on a window, powerful but unable to penetrate. You're right that families support each other, I said calmly. But support goes both ways. When have you ever asked how I'm doing without immediately following up with a request for money? When have you offered to help me with anything? When have you shown interest in my relationship with Jake, or my career goals, or my happiness? The questions hung in the air, unanswered because we all knew the answers. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, growing increasingly heated as my parents realized their usual tactics weren't working. They tried everything in their manipulation playbook. Guilt about Grandma Helen's memory, warnings about what people would think, threats to cut me out of family events, promises that things would be different in the future if I just forgive this one misunderstanding. But with each attempt to break me down, I felt stronger and clearer about what I needed to do. I'm not willing to continue this relationship under the current terms, I said finally, my voice calm and decisive. If you want to have a relationship with me, it needs to be based on mutual respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. No more manufactured emergencies, no more guilt-inducing requests for money, no more using my sister or my grandmother's memory to manipulate me. If you can commit to changing these patterns and treating me like a daughter rather than a bank account, I'm willing to work on rebuilding our relationship. If not, I need to step away and protect myself. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my parents processing what I'd said, calculating whether they could agree to my terms or if they needed to deploy more extreme measures to regain control. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I think you've made your position very clear, she said. You care more about money than family, more about that boyfriend than the people who raised you. We're disappointed, but we're not surprised. This is what happens when children forget where they come from. With that, she reached forward and ended the call, leaving me staring at a black screen and the reflection of my own face in my laptop. I sat in the quiet of our kitchen for several minutes, processing what had just happened. There had been no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no willingness to consider my perspective, no interest in salvaging our relationship on healthier terms. They'd chosen to end things rather than examine their own behavior or commit to change. It was devastating and liberating at the same time. Devastating to lose my family, liberating to finally be free of their manipulation and control. The little girl inside me who'd spent decades trying to earn their unconditional love finally understood that it was never going to happen. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face full of concern and support. "How did it go?" he asked gently, though my expression probably told him everything he needed to know. I explained what had happened, how they denied everything, and ultimately chosen to end the relationship rather than address their behavior. He held me while I cried tears that were equal parts grief and relief. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into my hair. "I know that was incredibly difficult, but you stood up for yourself. You protected us, protected our future together." The following weeks were strange and difficult. I kept reaching for my phone to text my mother about random things. A funny incident at work, a beautiful sunset, a question about a family recipe. The silence felt unnatural after 28 years of regular contact, even if much of that contact had been negative or manipulative. I grieved the family I'd thought I had, the parents I'd wished for, the sister I'd hoped to save. Jake was patient with my emotional roller coaster, understanding that grief and relief could coexist, that choosing to protect myself didn't make the loss any less painful. But as the weeks passed, the benefits of my decision became increasingly clear. Our financial stress disappeared almost overnight. Without the constant threat of family emergencies and guilt-inducing requests, Jake and I could make plans with confidence. We started saving for our house down payment again, began discussing wedding plans, and even splurged on small luxuries without constantly calculating whether we needed to keep money available for family crises. The relief was profound, like finally setting down a heavy weight I'd been carrying for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. 3 months after the confrontation, Lily called again. She was back home from her retreat, living in her own apartment for the first time in years, and working with a local therapist to maintain the progress she'd made. "I told them I talked to you," she said without preamble. "I told them what I'd revealed about their manipulation, and they're furious with both of us now." She'd been getting the silent treatment too, punishment for breaking ranks and exposing their tactics. But something unexpected had happened during her retreat. She'd learned to value her own well-being over their approval, and she was discovering what it felt like to make decisions based on her own needs rather than their expectations. "I wanted to apologize," she continued, her voice sincere in a way I'd rarely heard before, "for my part in what they did to you, for all the times I let them use me to make you feel guilty. I was so focused on getting what I needed that I never considered how unfair it was to you." She explained how the therapists at the retreat had helped her understand codependency and family triangulation, how she'd been trained from childhood to see my success as her failure and vice versa. "They pit us against each other so we'd never unite against them," she realized. "As long as we were competing for their approval and resources, we'd never question their behavior." Our conversation that day was the most honest we'd ever had as adult siblings. We talked about our childhood, the different roles we'd been assigned, the ways our parents had used us against each other for decades. Lily shared insights from her therapy about narcissistic family systems and emotional manipulation, concepts that helped me understand our family dynamics in a new light. We began to build a relationship based on mutual support rather than competition. Sisters allied against dysfunction rather than rivals for limited love and approval. The holidays that year were different, but not necessarily worse. Instead of dreading family gatherings and calculating how much money I'd need to budget for various crises, Jake and I hosted Thanksgiving for his family and a few close friends. Our small apartment was filled with laughter, genuine gratitude, and people who loved each other without conditions or hidden agendas. I cooked my grandmother's cornbread recipe, sharing stories about her warmth and kindness with people who appreciated hearing about someone who genuinely loved me. The absence of family drama allowed me to actually enjoy the celebration instead of just surviving it. Christmas was harder because it had always been my grandmother's favorite holiday, and her absence felt particularly acute. But Jake surprised me with a small Christmas tree and helped me create new traditions that honored my memories without perpetuating painful patterns. We spent Christmas morning in our pajamas, drinking coffee and exchanging thoughtful gifts we'd actually budgeted for. Lily called to wish us well, and we had a brief but warm conversation about our plans for the coming year. No one asked for money, no one manufactured a crisis, and no one made me feel guilty for enjoying my life. Looking back now, 6 months after the confrontation, I can see how profoundly my life has changed. Jake and I got engaged 2 months ago, a quiet moment in our living room where he presented me with a simple but beautiful ring he'd designed himself. We're planning a small wedding focused on celebrating our love rather than managing family politics or drama. We've been approved for a mortgage and will be moving into our first house next month, a small craftsman bungalow with a garden where I can grow vegetables and flowers. These milestones feel sacred in a way they never could have when they were constantly threatened by family financial emergencies. My relationship with Lily continues to grow stronger as we both work on healing from our dysfunctional upbringing. She's thriving in her own life, dating someone who treats her well, advancing in her career, and being the kind of mother she wants to be without constant interference from our parents. We text regularly now, sharing successes and challenges without the underlying competition that used to characterize our interactions. Sometimes we talk about our parents and the possibility of reconciliation, but we're both committed to protecting the progress we've made, rather than sacrificing it for the slim possibility of change that's never materialized before. The grief for my parents and the family I'd hoped for still surfaces sometimes, usually triggered by major life events or memories of my grandmother. I recently started therapy to work through the complex emotions around choosing self-protection over family loyalty, and it's been helpful to have professional support in processing decades of manipulation and conditioning. My therapist has helped me understand that choosing to protect myself from abuse isn't selfish or cruel. It's necessary for my mental health and future happiness. If you've watched this far, you probably recognize some of these patterns in your own life. Maybe you have family members who only contact you when they need something, who use guilt and obligation as weapons, who make you feel responsible for problems you didn't create. I want you to know that their behavior isn't your fault, and you don't owe anyone access to your resources, your energy, or your emotional well-being just because you share DNA. Family relationships should be sources of support and love, not constant stress and manipulation. Some practical advice I wish someone had given me years ago. Trust your gut when something feels wrong, even if you can't immediately articulate why. Keep track of the patterns in your relationships, who reaches out when, what they usually want, how often they offer support versus asking for it. Set specific boundaries around money and stick to them, no matter how emotional the manipulation becomes. Don't try to change other people's behavior. Focus on protecting yourself and controlling your own responses. And remember that walking away from toxic relationships isn't giving up on family. It's choosing to prioritize your own health and future. So people who truly love you will respect your boundaries and support your decisions to protect yourself. They'll be happy about your successes without immediately calculating what those successes can do for them. They'll ask about your life because they genuinely care, not because they're looking for information they can use later. These people might be family members, or they might be friends who become chosen family. Either way, They're the relationships worth investing in and protecting. For those of you dealing with similar situations, please know that you're not alone. The comment section of this video has become a space where people share their own stories of family manipulation and boundary setting, and it's incredible to see how many of us have had similar experiences. If you need professional support, there are therapists who specialize in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. If you need legal advice about protecting your assets or establishing no-contact orders, those resources exist too. I'm sharing this story not to bash my family or gain sympathy, but to help others recognize that they deserve better than relationships built on manipulation and exploitation. Your dreams matter, your happiness matters, and your right to protect yourself matters. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, even if those people raised you or claim to love you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your future is to walk away from people who consistently harm you, regardless of their relationship to you. If this story resonated with you, please share where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe to join a community of people who understand the complexity of family relationships and the courage it takes to prioritize your own well-being. Your support means everything to me, and knowing that sharing my experience helps others makes the difficult journey worthwhile. Remember, you deserve love without conditions, support without ulterior motives, and relationships that add joy to your life rather than constant stress. Don't settle for less than that, no matter who's asking you to compromise your happiness for their benefit.